On today's episode, we're going to talk about a death anniversary. That date that keeps coming up.
Why does it matter and how you feel about it? Let's talk about it.
Let's talk about death, baby. Let's talk about grief and mourning. Is it argumental or existential? What's it mean to me? Let's talk about death.
Hi, I'm Benny Cabal, and I'm a funeral professional.
And I'm Nicholas Cabal, psychologist.
Hey, Nick, let's talk about death.
Let's do it.
So, Doc, one of the big things that I come across in the funeral home, individuals who are dealing with grief or loss, they tend to bring up is they'll say, it was a year from Tuesday you had Dad here. It's interesting, Doc, that we as humans, we almost have how they have you have an internal clock for when you wake up, It's almost what's the rhythm? What's the Arcanian rhythm or whatever?
Well, I think it makes sense, right? If you think about this, right? One of the things that I think a lot of grieving widows and widowers talk about is that they compare themselves to that date. So, for example, a year of grieving, right? Mm-hmm. They're going to go, well, that first month was miserable, right? I could barely get out of bed. Everybody was asking me what I needed, couldn't answer that question, didn't even know what I needed at that point. And now I'm starting to get rid of the, Charlie stuff in the closet. And I feel like I got a leg up in this. Not that I'm, happy rainbow roses, but what I find with especially prolonged grief, if we're going to call it that, right, is that when people are seeing a therapist for multiple years with the same grief, right? Which does happen. You are not crazy if you're doing this.
Yeah, can I stop you just for a second? Can you explain to people what prolonged grief is if they don't really quite grasp that?
So, so there is a big bugaboo, if you will, in the psychology department when it comes to diagnosing grief. Because there is clinicians out there, therapists out there that believe that we shouldn't be diagnosing it. There is clinicians out there that think that we have to be, because if someone has traumatic loss or something like that, it should be different than someone who is just, grieving their grandparent or something like that. Again, I'm not trying to get political in this thing, but I'm going to say that what I mean by prolonged grief is that someone who's really struggling with grief for an extended period of time. So maybe that's a year, maybe that's 2 years, 3 years, because I hear this all the time. Like, what is the timeline? And I think that's one of the bigger problems we're having right now in my field is that people want to give a timeline, and grief, like we've said multiple times on this show, there is no timeline.
Well, I think it's because we as society give a timeline, right? Your bereavement day is 3 days. There's everything has to be.
This is the problem, because a lot of widows and widowers that I sit with think that their year mark, they should be fine.
Right.
They should be back to normal. I'm not necessarily saying skipping and rainbow and roses, but they feel like within a year, if they go through their grieving process correctly, right? Quotations correctly, that they should be fine. And the reality is that fine doesn't really answer anything to begin with, right? If someone says, when you ask them how are you doing? They're like, fine. They're basically telling you, I don't want to tell you how I feel.
100%.
Right?
Yeah, it's a write-off.
Right.
It's 100%.
It's the same.
Right.
It's the same situation I have at Home Depot when Clark comes up to me and goes, "Can I help you?" And I'm like, I'm just browsing.
I'm just looking around.
Right. It's the knee-jerk response to, I don't really want to.
You're encroaching on my personal space. Yes. Please leave.
Okay, so the big problem I have though is I understand why people use death anniversaries for a notch, right? So they could go, okay. My thing is to not put timelines on yourself, because unfortunately, in my experience, most people that have put timelines on themselves, it doesn't work that way, and then they get even more frustrated. So not only are they dealing with one of the biggest losses in their life, but they're now also peed off with themselves because I should be in this, or I should be here, or I should be doing this. And it's just not the case.
Well, and the other thing that I hear a lot, and Doc, we've talked about this yet again, we are not here to judge. We are just telling you how we have been told from other grievers is they'll put these things online, heavenly birthday, right? Like this idea that now you're bringing in faith, you're bringing in that they earned their wings a year ago, these kind of statements, right? And the question isn't the real thing that I want to bring up about this is going back to sometimes when you make comments like that, and are this is a freedom of speech, you have the freedom to write whatever you want, but it is interesting that you may or may not be hurting somebody's grief process by adding in that. Now, yet again, this is not a judgment. This is just, I hear that all the time, right? This is his heavenly birthday, or this is the year that he gained his wings. Something that's interesting about death anniversaries too, Doc, it's not necessarily just the actual date, right? But I find that the age that's attached to it too gets brought up. For instance, and here's a personal story too, Doc and I. Our dad lost his dad at a very, very young age. So not only does he bring up the death anniversary of Papa to Doc and I a lot, but something he always brought up before was he was always nervous about reaching the same age as his father when his father died. So that became a thing that gets associated with it. I hear it too, like the Smiths don't last past 86, So that's another interesting thing that we as humans do. And it's not necessarily the death anniversary, but it's attached to it, because I find that sometimes the age of that particular death anniversary too is interesting. Another little tidbit, Doc, that I find is it happens more often than you'd think, that coincidence is weird with it. And what I mean by that is a lot of times I have put on the death certificate the same death date as the birth date. People who die on their birthdays. So then it's an interesting thought too, is going back to when we talked about this on our death and the holidays, and please go listen to that if you haven't done that. But I find that people have a lot of will when it comes to, they want to wait till they can see their family one last time before they're ready to die after the holidays. So the funeral home gets very, very busy after the holidays. And my thought too to Doc that is it's interesting, because it's always like whenever I'm sitting doing an arrangement, there's a lot of times, I'm not going to say 80 or 90, but I'll say a good 50 to 60, where somehow a birthday is around that death. Whether it's the kid's birthday or the wife's birthday, or they just celebrated their anniversary for their wedding. So it is interesting that not only for us as the grievers deal with this death anniversary, but I would like to say that the individuals who are dying know that that date exists too. And obviously they know that the date exists, but is there possibly a little bit of a spiritual connection to that date? Doc, your thoughts? Does that make sense? Am I clarifying that, or am I just kind of saying all this stuff that's a little hard to understand?
I think I know what you're talking about, but I wanted to go back because you were talking about people that post stuff online, heavenly birthdays and stuff like that. For all the listeners out there who are widower, or a survivor of a recent loss, like, no matter what you put online, you
might offend somebody. Yeah.
You are going to normalize it for some people. You are going to offend some people, because what we do as human beings is that we tend to judge ourselves in comparison to other people. So, for example, someone who lost the love of their life, their soulmate, right? I put that in quotation marks because people see that in different ways.
I've seen your bunny ears.
Yeah. But no matter what you talk about, like, I keep coming back to the dating one, because that keeps coming up in my personal experience dealing with widows, is right, and widowers, especially widows, is they have this idea in their mind that they have to grieve for a year.
Okay.
And
Okay.
and now I'm not saying all of them, because it's not all of them. But there's a lot of widows, women, widowers are men. There's a lot of widows out there that feel like it's almost like the traditional, I have to wear black, I have to do this, I have to portray myself in a certain way for a year, because if I don't, that's a disrespect for my deceased husband or wife, right?
Can I throw a caveat to that? I think too, when it comes to society, yet again, this is not how Doc and I feel. This is just how society is right now. Women are judged more in everything that they do, whether it's they're like they self think that way or just honestly the society is that way. But that's how it comes across. And I think a lot of women too have this thing where it's like, I can't date for a year. I can't do this.
Well,
for
you're
a year. I
absolutely
can't."
true, but I'm gonna throw another apple into the caveat, if you will. A nugget,
A
right?
caveat on a caveat?
Nugget of truth. Women are really, really, really hard on each other too.
Oh, okay. Yep.
So there is these generational. The only reason why I say this to all the women's out there is that I had a classmate who did their dissertation on women and how women treat each other, and it was fascinating to me that how these old school traditional values, especially in womanhood, if I can call that, it shows up in the grief world. So especially depending on the cultures you're dealing with, right? If you're dealing with the old school traditional cultures, they have a big problem with people that will post online like, one of the things that really helped me was I met Jerry, right? And then in their minds, they're like, okay, you're 7 months into your first year.
You're not ready to date.
Not only are you not ready to date, you shouldn't be dating.
You're cheating on your husband that died.
Right. And the one thing I'm going to say to everybody out there, if I can help one thing. So, marriage contract, right? You go up and you say your vows, right?
Yes.
To death do us part. What does that mean?
That means the second that death occurs, that technically that contract is null and void.
Null and void, right. So for all the widows and widowers out there who are, and I'm not saying to go out tomorrow and date.
Yeah, but they could look. But
hold on. What I'm saying to you is that if you are struggling with the idea of whether or not I should be dating, right? I want you to really go back through your vows. There is nothing that you are doing that goes against your vows.
But here's a caveat on top of the caveat on top of the caveat. A lot of the times the children are judging too.
Oh, absolutely. That's a big part
So
of it.
on top of I don't feel right dating because it has to be a year. I don't want my kids to judge me for dating somebody without being a year after the death.
Right, but it's amazing because I sit with the children.
And they're like, no, we rather...
I sit with the children, and I will tell you, all parents out there, I sit with so many children, young, old, medium, right? Teenagers, very young 4-year-olds to 50-year-olds that are still dealing with their parents.
I mean, we're
right?
all
They're
children.
still dealing with their parents, right? And all of them will say the same thing to me over and
I want
over
them
again.
to be happy.
What is the most important thing for you? And they say, I want to see mom and dad happy.
Yep.
Now,
Yep.
with that being said, what else are children terrible at?
Telling their parents that.
Change.
Oh.
Change. When you start dating someone else, that whole view of mom or dad changes because traditions change, values change, the house changes. Dad used to really love wood, and now mom's painting everything. That's a nod out to my mother who loves to paint, and my father loves the wood. And I know that when one of them becomes deceased, No, it's
that's the truth,
wood.
right?
Dad likes his wood. Mom likes her paint. But like this happens so many times in my room is where what's really going on is not that they're angry at their parent for dating. What they're angry about is that everything is changing.
Yeah.
And who do we take all that aggression out on? We take it out on our parents because they're the more mature ones.
Right,
we think they can take it, right?
Right.
But what people don't understand is like everybody I've talked to, when they talk about soulmates and they talk about the love of their life, one of the things that they keep coming to is like, I'll never be lucky enough to meet another one.
Yep.
It happens.
Yep.
It happens. Now, is it the same love? No. Is it the same person? Absolutely not. But like, to fall in love, if you are living and you are struggling with this, I really, really, really advise you to either, if you're really struggling with it, come talk to me or talk to a therapist about it. But like, in all honesty, like, life is too dang short to not be happy.
Well, and it's interesting too, Doc, that I see it a lot, and I'm sure you see it a lot coming in and out of your room. Is widows and widowers tend to marry them other widowers or widows, and I think it's obviously because of that exact thing where they don't have to, we'll always have our first love. We love you, but it's different, right? It's a different soulmate at that point. But going back, let's get back to the actual death anniversary too, right? So we brought up a lot of good points, but let's get back to the specifics, especially people who talk about, because we've talked about it before too. Death anniversaries too. Let's go on the side of people who care for a griever, right? This is an important date to try to remember if you can, because this is when, a year's passed. So for this individual, life has gone on for everybody that's surrounding that person, right? The kids they've gone back to school, or the kids are, with their kids and doing their things in different states now, especially now that we're all separated. So that individual is grieving that day. And going back to that time, I feel like I hear a lot of grievers that no matter what, that day means something. Now, for every griever, is it the worst day of the year? Is it a big X on that calendar? No, I wouldn't say that. But I do say that I find for some reason that date gets ingrained in them.
Well, and I also see it with the grievers where they don't understand how people don't remember that it's the death anniversary. And what I'm going to say to every widower, or family member out there is like, society doesn't mean to forget. It's not like they're like, that date is, I'm never going to remember that date till the rest of my life. That is not what it is. The problem is that society forces people to move on.
Yeah, I hear it all the time. Like, oh man, it's been a year. I remember, and then in that situation, then their mind clicks. Then they remember.
Oh, that's why Shirley's acting so weird today,
she
right?
hasn't come out of her house, and
But like, the thing is like, I think grievers take that so personally, and they're like, well, how dare you not remember that was the day Joe died,
right?
And unfortunately, the reality is there's a lot of things going on here, right? Psychologically, one, we tend to avoid death, right? As human beings in general. Societally, we are told not to deal with death. And then on top of it, like, these people in that year have dealt with so much that we forget about that, right? Like, I can think of, like, if I was to separate every year of, even just with my children living, my oldest is 5, my youngest is 3. Like, if I separate my life in the last 5 years, there has been so much that has happened. And that's not discrediting people that have lost loved ones in those 5 years. But like, I have to focus on what's going on right now in my life. I got to make sure my kids are fed. I got to make sure all this stuff. And again, I'm not discrediting people's grief. What I'm saying to you is that people don't purposely mean to hurt you by forgetting the death date. Because the minute you remind them, they snap in. They go, oh my gosh, I cannot. How did I forget that, right? And it's not because they don't love that person. It's because they literally forgot.
Well, no, before we get to the Q&As, Doc, I do want to bring up too that, I find that this day, a lot of individuals will do a new tradition. So whether that be, I hear it all the time, right? The kids get together and they meet at the cemetery. They do, they have dinner together. I think what I would like to challenge all of you listeners out there is add something with meaning to that date on top of what you're already going through, because that date's going to be hard. I'm not discrediting And I'm not discrediting if you don't want to do anything.
Can I challenge one more thing in there?
Yeah.
Be flexible.
Okay.
Because one thing I do see that I struggle with is when it has to be a certain place.
Okay.
And the reason why I say that is because what happens if storm
Okay, gotcha.
year
Now you're upset because you didn't get to do it, or you didn't.
or
do it the
someone
right way.
feels guilty that they couldn't make it, but
Got
then another sibling's like, how dare you not come out in the tsunami of 2023?
Why did you have to break your leg the day before?
Right. Well, and the silly part about this is we all do this, right? We all judge each other. And even more importantly, what is really difficult and what I try to tend to focus on is how we judge ourselves. Like, oh my God, I am the worst child that I couldn't make it out to my, that ceremony, that tradition, right? And I call it a ceremony for a reason because that's how they take it. It's a ceremony, not a tradition. And the problem is like sitting with those people, you're like, I understand, I get it, but like your kid was in the hospital getting stitches.
Yep. And anybody who is listening to this podcast on their person's death anniversary, our heart goes out to you. Our heart goes out to you. And thank you for letting us be talking on this day. So thank you all for listening. Let's talk about some Q&As, buddy.
Q&A, let's get to those questions.
Q&A, everyone loves that Q&A.
Do you have an answer? Yeah. Got one for you? Yeah.
Does it help you? I
Yeah.
hope so.
All right, Nick.
Yes.
Doc, sorry.
Doing a lot of whispering lately.
Yeah. All right, here we go. I'm devastated. Big, bold words.
Okay.
My aunt passed in August, and I am still struggling with coping with it. We were close. We were very close, and it feels like I will never be able to forget the grief. How does one cope with the sudden loss of someone you thought would have many more years?
How do you cope with it? You acknowledge that death doesn't have a timeline. So you have to come to grips with this idea that most of us, not all of us, most of us don't have a solid timeline of when we're going to die because we don't know when it's going to happen. There is children that are dying from cancer that should never happen. We have super healthy vegan runners that get in a car accident and unfortunately they don't make it out of that. We have grandparents that have had amazing health and just unfortunately have a sudden heart attack and that's it. We've also had, tragedies such as suicide or I guess what I'm trying to say here is like we don't know when our number is going to be punched. So the reality of control. This is a human problem. We want control. We have a God complex. We think that we can control things, and when they don't happen, we struggle with it. Now, with that, I want to start by normalizing it. We all do this. We all do this. You're okay. What I really want you to focus on is how much you loved your aunt, because that's never going to change. That is something you can control. That is something that you know. You know how much you loved them. And that's why it hurts so bad when they're gone. It's because you're human and you loved. And because you loved, you are going to hurt. Hang in there.
Well, and I want to bring up something because a lot of us have the really cool aunt or the real cool uncle. And for all the really cool aunts and uncles out there,
Whoop, whoop.
golf clap.
Yep.
Really appreciate you because especially the ones that either A, couldn't have children or decided not to have children. And they have been amazing mentors and fun individuals that care for their nieces and nephews. So thank you out there. I want to also bring this up to you. The thing that you said you wish you had many more years. It's human nature. That the sad part about time is we never have enough of it. We never have enough of it. And I just want to say this sucks. And I'm sorry for your loss. And what you're doing right now is the best way of coping. Talking about it, openly discussing it, going to somebody and actually making yourself vulnerable and explaining your situation. It keeps the meaning of your aunt alive within you, and it also humanizes yourself and helps you get through this next journey. Because like Doc and I have talked about, and we've talked about it on this podcast, time doesn't exist when it comes to grief, and it's hard to put any time limit or anything. The big thing is you will forever be changed because of your aunt, and that's a beautiful thing. So thank you for bringing that up and being so vulnerable with that.
Well, thank you all for listening in. You know what? I do want to touch here on this really interesting new company. It's called No Story Lost. They will turn your parents' life story into a beautiful book. Now, they say parents. I wonder if they would do friends
sure
and
they do
family.
your kids.
Yeah, absolutely, right?
I'm sure they do your pet.
They will call. They will do interviews. They will make it super personal. It's amazing thing. Just to look it up. Look it up.
Put it in the bank.
They're offering our beautiful listeners out there an extra 2 copies of the book with the promo code LTAD, which is Let's Talk About That. So if you're interested, look them up. Actually, you know what? Write us in. Let us know what you think.
Yeah,
that'd be amazing, right? And also check out GriefWorks app. You can head to illumapps.com/LTAD for 15% off. This is a great app.
It's really convenient too. The idea that you can just pull out your phone and you can go through the grief journey with prompted, but also do it yourself. Actually have the time to do it, and you can do it at your leisure. It's awesome.
And your convenience.
There you go. And if you're coming up to a death anniversary, or maybe you just had a death anniversary, and you're struggling with it, feel free to reach out at us at Let's Talk About Death Pod at gmail.com with your questions, your thoughts, anything on this episode or any other questions, please. And also give us the stars, give us the reviews, come out and send this out to somebody. You know what? Somebody's having a death anniversary coming up. Maybe send them the app. Maybe send the pod out there. They might really get something out of it from listening to Doc and I. Please, and always help us get this word out. This is important. And if you are not talking about death,
then you aren't living. Thank you so much.